Good afternoon. I'm going to have a look at Frankenstein from a feminist perspective with you today. So the way I'm going to do that today is by looking at the portrayal of one of the female characters, one of the main female characters in fact, who is Elizabeth Lavanza. So Elizabeth Lavanza is the childhood foster sister of Victoria Frankenstein and becomes his wife. I'm hoping you've already read it because maybe there's going to be some spoilers in this, but let's just say this wasn't the best thing that happened to her, okay? But let's have a look at how she's described the first time they meet her. So this is in the exposition of the novel. It's the exposition of Victor's tale. And in it, he's talking about his childhood, he's talking about his family, and he's talking about how his family grows. So we're starting, as I said, in chapter 1. And he's narrating about a time when he was about 5 years old. So when I was about 5 years old, while making an excursion beyond the frontiers of Italy, they passed a week on the shores of the Lake of Como. Their benevolent disposition often made them enter the cottages of the poor. So here we have a characterisation of his family being charitable and giving. This to my mother was more than a duty, it was a necessity, a passion, remembering what she had suffered and how she had been relieved, for her to act in her turn the guardian angel to the afflicted. His mother is portrayed as angelic. Okay, she feels it's a duty, a passion to relieve other people's sufferings. So we have an angelic mother there. There's a nice feminist, there's a nice stereotype that feminists might disagree with and disapprove of. Okay, so he goes on to explain how they're in this poor village and they come across this family. And his mother, among these... among these was one which attracted my mother far above the rest. She appeared of a different stock. The 4 others were dark-eyed, hardy little vagrants. This child was thin and very fair. Her hair was the brightest living gold, and despite the poverty of her clothing, seemed to set a crown of distinction on her head. Golden hair, this is angelic, cherubic, and very much juxtaposed with the darkness of the other children. Her brow was clear and ample, her blue eyes cloudless, and her lips and the moulding of her face so expressive of sensibility and sweetness that none could behold her without looking on her as of a distinct species, a being heaven sent, and bearing a celestial stamp in all her features. So he's clearly saying here she is angelic, she's otherworldly. So this child has the presence of an angel. She's blonde and she's fair, unlike the children that she's with. He goes on to explain how actually the child is the daughter of a Milanese nobleman and her mother was German and died giving birth. So she's beautiful, she's angelic, she's fair-haired, she's fair-skinned, and she's an orphan. Okay, this is the perfectly helpless female here. Okay. Carrying on, he summarises about Elizabeth's family, and he continues to talk about her onto the next page. She continued with her foster parents and bloomed in their rude abode, fairer than a garden rose among dark-leaved brambles. So we've got these images of nature, and again, she's a rose, and everything around her is dark and challenging. What's quite interesting is that this reminds me of a poem, and I cannot remember the author of it right now, where he talks about how Jesus was a pearl in the mire. So she's this beautiful thing within this dirt and within this poverty. Of course, we can't forget that the setting is rural, so we automatically attach some of the ideals of a rural lifestyle, so nature, purity, simplicity. This appeals particularly to someone like Mary Shelley, who is a romantic poet, and the romantic poets believed that nature was closer to spirituality. So again, there's this suggestion that this child surrounded by nature, this child that's in a rural setting, has all of the benefits of the countryside, that purity and that clarity. However, Shelley has cleverly written her so that she also has nobility. There's no question of whether she is a good enough character or whether she has high enough status to become Victor's wife. So just in that tiny little bit of description, we can get so much feminist reading out of this. Okay, I'm going to continue though with the end of chapter 1. Okay, everyone loved Elizabeth. The passionate and almost reverential attachment with which all regarded her became, while I shared it, my pride and my delight. Pride. Interesting. On the evening previous to her being brought to my home, my mother had said playfully, "I have a pretty present for my Victor. Tomorrow he shall have it." And when, on the morrow, she presented Elizabeth to me as her promised gift, I, with childish seriousness, interpreted her words literally and looked upon Elizabeth as mine. Mine to protect, love, and cherish. Note that protect, love, and cherish, all three of those words are in the marriage vows. All praises bestowed upon her I received as made to a possession of my own. We called each other familiarly by the name of cousin. No word, no expression could body forth the kind of relation in which she stood to me, my more than sister, since till death she was to be mine only. So we do have a little bit of, completely forgot what I was going to say. We have a bit of a foreboding there that she is going to die, but we don't know how. Okay, so the things to bear in mind here. First of all, that we can see Elizabeth as conforming to that stereotype of being essentially helpless. Yeah, she is a poor orphan girl. Interestingly also, of course, Victor's family are shown as saviours. They're shown as redeemers, and they will save her. Okay, they will take her from this poverty and raise her up in the kind of environment that she should have been raised up in according to her genetic line. So that's quite interesting as well. She's returning to her societal level. Interesting point about this idea of her being a gift. Yeah, a Marxist reader might suggest that there's reification. As a female, she becomes the property. You could argue that. Some of the things to think about in terms of context, as I said before, Shelley is a romantic author. So we do have lots of description of nature, and she's fascinated by nature. But we could argue that actually this is a surprisingly restrained description of a woman. This is a very restrained characterization of a female, given that Mary Shelley came from a very academic family. Her mother was Mary Wollstonecraft, who wrote The Vindication of the Rights of Women. She was a very strong feminist, and Mary Shelley herself had lots of feminist leanings. So when it comes to looking at this portrayal and looking at the women in Frankenstein, we have some quite complicated context to look at. We do have the background of Victorian women. You know, we have the angel of the hearth, which is very much what we seem to see in Victor's mother. And yet, as I said, we have this conflicting, contrasting feminism which was rife in Shelley's home. She was an incredibly well-educated woman and surrounded by very liberal thinkers. So it's quite interesting to look at these women from that particular perspective. Our next video, I will talk about marriage as a concept. We'll take a feminist viewpoint of marriage and partnership.